Commander Zeth-Kairon's genetically perfect form hit the ground like a meteor, his crystalline armor cracking against rocks that had the audacity to be harder than expected. Pathetic planetary composition, he snarled, pulling himself upright with the fluid grace that marked him as one of the Valdris Empire's evolutionary elite. Around him, the twisted remains of the exploration vessel Evolutionary Apex painted the landscape in debris and sparking technology. "Sir," Lieutenant Kexmorian called from beside a smoking engine fragment, her own crystalline carapace sporting hairline fractures that would heal within the hour. "We've crashed on planetary designation Theta 891. Local classification, Category 3. Primitive world. No significant technological development detected. Excellent." Zeth-Kairon's 4 eyes scanned the alien environment with practiced superiority. Dense vegetation, primitive atmospheric composition, probably inhabited by some form of barely evolved fauna. Then this will be a simple matter of demonstration and extraction. Signal the fleet. "Communications are down, sir. Impact damaged our quantum relay. No matter." The commander's genetically enhanced muscles rippled as he stretched, already healing from the crash trauma that would have liquefied most galactic species. "We'll simply establish our obvious technological and biological superiority over whatever local primitives we encounter. They'll be eager to assist us once they understand what they're dealing with." Lieutenant Kexmorian consulted her bioscanner, frowning at readings that made no sense. "Sir, I'm detecting elevated thermal signatures throughout this region. Atmospheric composition shows unusual chemical markers, probably volcanic activity. These primitive worlds are always geologically unstable." Zeth-Kairon activated his personal shielding, a shimmer of energy that would protect his perfect physiology from environmental contamination. "Gather the portable technology. We'll make contact with the locals and arrange for immediate extraction. This shouldn't take more than a few hours." The sound of approaching footsteps made both Valdris warriors snap to attention. Through the dense vegetation came a figure that defied immediate classification. Bipedal, relatively small, covered in some kind of primitive organic fiber rather than proper armor or technological enhancement. "Oh wow," the creature said, and its voice carried tones that the universal translator struggled to parse. "That was quite a crash. Everyone okay?" Zeth-Kairon drew himself to his full 8-foot height, his 4 arms spreading in a display of genetic superiority that had intimidated countless species across the galaxy. His bioluminescent markings pulsed with authority patterns bred into his DNA over millennia of careful evolution. "I am Commander Zeth-Kairon of the Valdris Empire, supreme evolutionary achievement of our galactic sector. You will immediately assist in the recovery of our vessel and the arrangement of our departure from this primitive world." The local creature, apparently female by biological markers, looked him up and down with what appeared to be mild interest rather than the appropriate awe and terror. "I'm Phoenix," she replied conversationally, "and I hate to break it to you, but your ship's pretty much scrap metal now. Also, you might want to adjust your shields or whatever that shimmer is. The air here's got some kick to it." "Our atmospheric analysis indicates no immediate threats to superior Valdris physiology," Lieutenant Kexmorian interjected, her scanner beeping confidently. Phoenix shrugged. "If you say so. But you might want to check that reading again. We're at about 35% humidity today, temperature's sitting around 95 degrees, and there's a nice ozone buildup from the UV exposure. Plus, we've got some lovely sulfur compounds drifting in from the thermal vents about 2 miles east." Both Valdris warriors stared at their scanners, which suddenly began registering environmental factors that their initial crash-landing assessment had somehow missed. "These readings." Kexmorian's voice carried a note of concern. "Sir, atmospheric toxicity is approaching concerning levels." "Impossible," Zeth-Kairon declared. "Valdris genetic perfection allows us to thrive in environments that would destroy lesser species. This primitive world poses no threat to our evolved biology." Phoenix looked at them with something that might have been sympathy. "Right. Well, when you start feeling dizzy or nauseous, that's the sulfur compounds. When your skin starts itching, that's the UV. And when you start having trouble breathing, that's probably the humidity messing with your respiratory system. Most off-worlders have trouble with our atmosphere until they acclimate." "Off-worlders?" Zeth-Kairon's bioluminescent markings shifted to patterns of confusion. You're aware of extraterrestrial life? Sure, you guys crash here pretty regularly. Usually takes about 3 days for the rescue ships to show up. Phoenix gestured toward what appeared to be a well-worn path through the vegetation. There's a shelter about a mile north where most visitors waited out. Climate-controlled, basic amenities, that sort of thing. We require no assistance from primitives, the commander stated flatly. Valdris superiority. He was interrupted by Lieutenant Kexmorian's sudden coughing fit. Her crystalline carapace was beginning to show stress fractures that had nothing to do with the crash, and her bio readings were spiking into uncomfortable ranges. The atmospheric composition appears to be more challenging than initially assessed, she managed between coughs. Phoenix watched this with the expression of someone who'd seen it before. Yeah, Earth's a bit of an acquired taste. Look, I know you probably think you're genetically perfect, or whatever, but our environment's got some quirks. Want to head to the shelter? Earth? Zeth-Kairon's 4 eyes widened. This is the legendary deathworld? The planetary classification must be in error. Earth is rated as uninhabitable by all galactic standards. Uninhabitable? Phoenix looked genuinely confused. We've got 8 billion people living here. It's not that bad once you get used to it. 8 billion? Lieutenant Kexmorian's scanner was now screaming warnings about atmospheric toxicity, UV radiation, and biological contamination. How is that possible? Same way anything's possible, I guess. Evolution. Phoenix started walking toward the path, moving with casual ease through vegetation that was already making the Valdris warriors' enhanced respiratory systems work overtime. You coming? Because standing around in direct sunlight isn't doing your friend any favors. Zeth-Kairon looked at his lieutenant, whose perfect, crystalline features were beginning to show the strain of environmental exposure that shouldn't have been possible. His own genetically superior physiology was starting to register discomfort from atmospheric conditions that his species' best scientists had deemed merely primitive. This is temporary, he announced, following Phoenix toward the shelter. Valdris adaptation protocols will adjust to local conditions within hours. We are the evolutionary pinnacle of our galactic sector. Cool, Phoenix replied, stepping over a fallen log that she navigated with unconscious grace, while both Valdris warriors had to climb over it with considerably more effort. What's your homeworld like? Perfectly engineered for optimal biological development. Climate-controlled, atmospheric composition balanced for maximum genetic expression. Geological stability maintained through advanced terraforming. Zeth-Kairon's voice carried the pride of a species that had conquered nature itself. Sounds nice. Probably pretty easy to live on. Easy? The concept seemed to confuse him. It is optimal. Valdris evolution has progressed beyond the need to struggle against environmental challenges. Phoenix paused mid-step, turning to look at him with an expression that was hard to read. You evolved past struggling with your environment. Precisely. We achieve genetic perfection by eliminating the need to adapt to hostile conditions. Our worlds are engineered to support our superior biology. Huh. Phoenix resumed walking, but something in her tone had changed. That's interesting. They continued through the forest in relative silence, the 2 Valdris warriors growing increasingly uncomfortable despite their technological advantages and genetic perfection. The simple act of walking seemed to require more effort than it should have, and the atmospheric conditions that Phoenix navigated effortlessly were putting strain on their supposedly superior physiologies. How much further? Lieutenant Kexmorian asked, her breath coming in shorter gasps than someone of her evolutionary caliber should have required. About half a mile, Phoenix replied without turning around. Just through that clearing where the ground's a bit warmer. As they emerged from the tree line, both Valdris warriors stopped dead. Ahead of them stretched a patch of ground that appeared to be glowing. Is that? Zeth-Kairon's scanner was emitting warnings that his translated as variations of certain death. Thermal vent field, Phoenix explained casually. Surface temperature runs about 140 degrees. Nothing too crazy, but it's the most direct route to the shelter. We can go around if you want, but it adds about 3 miles to the hike. She stepped onto the superheated ground without hesitation, her primitive footwear apparently providing adequate protection from temperatures that would have required serious technological intervention for either Valdris warrior to survive. This is impossible, Zeth-Kairon breathed, watching Phoenix walk across terrain that his scanners were classifying as a volcanic hazard zone. No biological entity can survive direct contact with those surface temperatures. She appears to be not only surviving but moving with complete comfort, Lieutenant Kexmorian observed, her voice carrying notes of something that might have been fear. Phoenix was already halfway across the thermal field, moving at a steady pace that suggested this was routine rather than extraordinary. She paused and turned back toward them. "You guys coming? We can take the long way if you need to, but there's a weather front moving in and you really don't want to be caught in the open when the rain hits." Both Valdris warriors stared at the human walking casually through conditions that their genetically perfect biology couldn't survive without technological assistance. And that's when Zeth-Kairon began to suspect that everything the Valdris Empire believed about evolutionary superiority might be catastrophically wrong. "Commander," Lieutenant Kexmorian's voice carried a tremor that Valdris genetic conditioning should have made impossible. "Our environmental suits are registering critical thermal warnings just from proximity to that surface." Zeth-Kairon activated his emergency cooling systems, technology that had been designed to handle the most extreme conditions the galaxy could offer. The power drain was immediate and concerning. His suit's energy reserves, meant to last for days, were being consumed at an alarming rate just to keep him functional near the thermal field. "Phoenix!" he called out, his voice carrying across the superheated air. "Your protective equipment. What technology are you using to survive those surface temperatures?" Phoenix paused in her casual stroll across what his scanners insisted was molten death, and looked down at her feet with apparent confusion. "Protective equipment? Oh, you mean my boots?" She lifted one foot, showing what appeared to be simple leather construction with some kind of rubber sole. "Got them at a thrift store for $12. They're not really heat-rated or anything." $12? Lieutenant Kexmorian's translator struggled with the primitive economic reference. "That's approximately 0.003 galactic credits? Sounds about right. They're not fancy, but they get the job done." Zeth-Kairon felt something that his genetic conditioning had eliminated generations ago. Genuine bewilderment. "You're traversing a thermal hazard zone in footwear that costs less than a basic atmospheric sensor? I mean, it's just hot ground. The boots keep my feet from getting burned." Phoenix resumed walking, reaching the far side of the thermal field and turning back to face them. "Seriously, are you guys okay? You're looking a little stressed." Looking stressed was an understatement. Both Valdris warriors were now running full environmental support, their advanced life support systems working overtime to protect them from conditions that a human was navigating in bargain footwear. "This is impossible," Zeth-Kairon muttered, watching his power reserves continue to drain. "No organic biology can withstand those thermal levels without technological enhancement." "Sir," Lieutenant Kexmorian consulted her bioscanner with growing alarm. "I'm reading the human surface body temperature. It's elevated, but within normal biological parameters. Her cardiovascular system is functioning normally. No signs of thermal stress. Superiority. I've run the scan 3 times. Sir, she's not just surviving those conditions. Her biology appears to be adapted for them," Phoenix called across the thermal field with obvious concern. "Look, I can come back and help you guys across if you need, but honestly, you might want to think about upgrading your gear. That environmental suit looks pretty high-tech, but it seems like it's working really hard just to keep you comfortable." Zeth-Kairon looked down at his suit. A masterpiece of Valdris engineering that represented centuries of technological advancement and countless credits in research and development. It was failing to handle environmental conditions that a human was managing with 12-credit footwear. The long route, he decided, his pride warring with the evidence of his own scanners. "We'll take the long route," Phoenix nodded. "No problem. Fair warning, though. The long way goes through some swampy areas, and there's a section where we'll need to cross a creek that's running a little high from the recent rains." "Swampy areas?" Lieutenant Kexmorian's voice had climbed an octave. "Elevated moisture content creates additional atmospheric challenges. Plus, there are usually some bugs," Phoenix added helpfully. "Nothing too serious. Mosquitoes, maybe some wasps if we're unlucky. Oh, and watch out for poison ivy." "Poison ivy? Local plant. Causes skin irritation on contact. Most people develop immunity after a few exposures, but visitors sometimes have reactions. Zeth-Kairon felt his genetically perfect confidence wavering. You said visitors. How many off-world species have crashed here? This month? You're number 4. Last month was busier. Had 6 different ships come down. Weather's been pretty mild lately, so most folks handle it okay. Phoenix started walking along the edge of the thermal field, toward what appeared to be an even more challenging path through dense, humid-looking vegetation. Course, winter's coming, so that'll change things. Winter? Yeah, temperature drops to maybe 20 degrees, lots of snow and ice. Some of the visitors have trouble with that. She paused, seeming to consider something. Actually, most of the visitors have trouble with that. And spring, and summer. Fall's usually okay, unless we get hurricanes. Hurricanes, Lieutenant Kexmorian repeated weakly. Atmospheric disturbances. High winds, heavy rain, sometimes tornadoes. Pretty standard weather patterns. Phoenix resumed walking, navigating through underbrush that looked like it could conceal any number of threats. Don't worry, the shelter's built to handle pretty much anything the weather throws at it. As they followed her into increasingly challenging terrain, Zeth-Kairon found himself confronting an uncomfortable truth. Every step of this journey was proving that his species' evolutionary perfection was laughably inadequate for conditions that humans apparently considered routine, and Phoenix was treating their obvious technological and biological superiority like a mild curiosity at best. The shelter turned out to be a modest structure that looked like it had been assembled from salvaged materials and good intentions. Phoenix opened the door with a casual gesture that revealed an interior designed for beings who apparently didn't require the advanced life support systems that were keeping both Valdris warriors alive. Home sweet home, she announced, stepping inside what Zeth-Kairon's scanners immediately classified as an environmental hazard zone. Basic amenities, climate control that mostly works, and a communication array for when your people show up. Lieutenant Kexmorian hesitated at the threshold, her instruments detecting atmospheric composition that violated several galactic safety protocols. The internal environment appears to be unregulated. Oh, the air conditioning's broken again, Phoenix said, fiddling with what appeared to be a primitive mechanical device. But it's only about 85 degrees in here, so it's pretty comfortable. Want some water? Water? Zeth-Kairon's bioscanner immediately began analyzing the molecular composition of the liquid Phoenix was casually dispensing from a simple container. This substance contains mineral impurities, trace organic compounds, and… Is that naturally occurring fluoride? Yeah, it's tap water. Comes from the local aquifer. Phoenix drank directly from the container without any apparent filtration or purification process. It's actually pretty good. Some of the visiting crews complain about the taste, but I've never had any problems. Both Valdris warriors stared as she consumed what their analysis indicated was a complex chemical mixture that would require extensive processing to be safe for most galactic species. You ingest untreated planetary water? Lieutenant Kexmorian's voice carried the horrified tone of someone watching a sentient being commit slow suicide. Untreated, it goes through the city water system, gets chlorinated, filtered, all that good stuff. Phoenix offered them the container. Want some? You guys look a little dehydrated. Zeth-Kairon's enhanced immune system immediately began preparing defensive protocols against potential contamination, just from proximity to the unprocessed liquid. Valdris physiology requires precisely calibrated hydration solutions. Our metabolic processes cannot tolerate the chemical irregularities present in naturally occurring water sources. That seems like it would make travel pretty complicated. Phoenix settled into what appeared to be a primitive seating arrangement. So, what's your home planet like? Must be pretty sterile if you can't handle basic H2O. Valdris Prime represents the pinnacle of environmental engineering, Zeth-Kairon replied, activating his personal air filtration system to cope with the shelter's unregulated atmosphere. Atmospheric composition maintained at optimal ratios, surface temperature controlled within 0.3 degrees, humidity levels precisely regulated, all water sources molecularly purified. Sounds really boring. The comment hit Zeth-Kairon like a physical blow. Boring? We have eliminated environmental uncertainty. Our world is a perfect expression of technological mastery over natural chaos. Right, but what do you do for fun? I mean, if everything's controlled and predictable, how do you challenge yourselves? Lieutenant Kex Morian was consulting her cultural database with obvious confusion. Challenge ourselves? Valdris evolution has progressed beyond the need for environmental challenges. We have achieved optimal biological efficiency, but how do you grow? How do you adapt? How do you get stronger? Phoenix looked genuinely puzzled. If your environment never changes, never pushes you, how do you know what you're capable of? We already know what we're capable of, Zeth-Kairon declared. Genetic perfection, superior evolutionary development, technological mastery that allows us to conquer star systems. Okay, but you can't conquer this one. The simple statement hung in the air like an indictment. Both Valdris warriors were currently dependent on their environmental suits just to survive in a basic shelter, on a world that Phoenix inhabited without any technological assistance whatsoever. This is a temporary adaptation period, Zeth-Kairon protested. Our biology will adjust to local conditions within standard time frames. How long is that usually? For most worlds, 6 to 12 hours. Phoenix checked what appeared to be a primitive chronometer. It's been about 4 hours since you crashed. How are you feeling? Lieutenant Kex Morian consulted her bio-readings with growing alarm. Sir, my environmental suit is showing increased power consumption. Atmospheric filtration systems are working at 94% capacity, just to maintain basic life support. And we're in the shelter, Phoenix pointed out. This is the easy environment. Outside, you've got direct sunlight, humidity, temperature variations, air pressure changes, from elevation differences, chemical compounds from vegetation, UV radiation, cosmic radiation that makes it through the atmosphere. Cosmic radiation? Zeth-Kairon's scanner immediately began detecting background radiation levels that his homeworld's atmospheric shielding eliminated entirely. This world has insufficient atmospheric protection from stellar radiation? Same as any world with a normal atmosphere. Earth's magnetic field deflects most of the really nasty stuff, but yeah, we get some background radiation. Nothing too serious. Phoenix stretched casually, apparently unbothered by environmental factors that were putting increasing strain on advanced alien life support systems. Most people don't even think about it. Most people, Lieutenant Kex Morian repeated weakly. How many humans live in environments with this level of ambient radiation? All of them? The answer was delivered with such casual matter-of-factness that both Valdris warriors took several seconds to process its implications. Well, humans live with ambient radiation levels that require technological protection from most galactic species. Zeth-Kairon's voice climbed an octave. I guess? I mean, it's just normal background stuff. Solar radiation, cosmic rays, trace radioactive elements in soil and rock. Radon in basements, medical X-rays. Phoenix shrugged. It's not like we have a choice. It's just part of living on a planet. Part of living on a planet, Zeth-Kairon repeated, his worldview cracking like his lieutenant's crystalline carapace. On Valdris Prime, background radiation was eliminated through technological intervention. The idea that an entire species could simply live with constant low-level exposure was fundamentally alien to his understanding of biological capability. Phoenix, Lieutenant Kex Morian said carefully, what do humans consider dangerous environmental conditions? Dangerous? Phoenix considered this seriously. Well, you don't want to be outside during a major hurricane. Category 5 storms can get pretty intense. Tornadoes are bad news. Volcanic eruptions are usually worth avoiding. Earthquakes can be rough, depending on the magnitude. Extreme cold, like below -40, gets challenging without proper gear. Same with extreme heat if you're talking about desert conditions. Over 120 degrees. Both Valdris warriors were frantically checking their environmental databases, trying to correlate Phoenix's casual list with galactic standards for planetary habitability. Category 5 storms, Lieutenant Kex Morian managed. Those involve wind speeds exceeding standard measurement parameters. Yeah, they can get up to 180 miles per hour sustained winds, sometimes higher. Phoenix spoke as if discussing mildly interesting weather trivia rather than atmospheric conditions that would qualify as natural disasters on most civilized worlds. Course, that's just the sustained winds. Gusts can be quite a bit higher. And humans remain on the planetary surface during these events? Well, not outside. You take shelter, maybe evacuate if you're in a flood zone, but yeah, most people just ride them out. It's not like you can leave the planet every time there's bad weather. Zeth-Kairon felt his fundamental understanding of biological capability undergoing catastrophic revision. His species had achieved interstellar travel by creating perfectly controlled environments that eliminated the need to adapt to challenging conditions. But Phoenix was describing adaptation to conditions that would require emergency evacuation protocols on most civilized worlds. "Phoenix," he said slowly, "what is the average human life expectancy in these environmental conditions?" "About 73 years, globally. Higher in developed countries with good healthcare systems. 73 years in ambient radiation, extreme weather, unfiltered water, unregulated atmosphere." Lieutenant Kexamorian's voice trailed off as her cultural database tried, and failed, to process this information. "Pretty good, considering we haven't had interstellar medicine very long," Phoenix replied. "Used to be a lot shorter, before we figured out hygiene and antibiotics and vaccines." That's when the communication array that Phoenix had mentioned activated with an incoming signal. The holographic display showed the familiar crystalline features of Valdris High Command, specifically Admiral Vel-Kairth of the Rescue Operations Division. "Commander Zeth-Kairon, this is Admiral Vel-Kairth. We have received your emergency beacon and are dispatching immediate extraction. What is your current status?" Zeth-Kairon looked around the primitive shelter, where he was barely surviving with full technological support, then at Phoenix, who was living comfortably in conditions that were systematically destroying his confidence in Valdris' superiority. "Admiral," he said carefully, "the situation is complex." "Complex how?" "You're on a Category 3 primitive world. Standard extraction protocols should suffice." "Sir, I believe the planetary classification may require revision." There was a pause from the Admiral that suggested he was processing information that didn't compute. "Revision? Commander, you're on Earth. It's a well-documented primitive world with basic atmospheric composition and simple life forms." Phoenix raised her hand. "Actually, I think there might be some confusion about the simple life forms thing." Admiral Vel-Kairth's image flickered as he apparently noticed Phoenix for the first time. "Commander, why are you discussing classified rescue operations with local primitives?" "Sir," Zeth-Kairon replied, "I'm beginning to suspect that our understanding of what constitutes primitive may need significant adjustment." And that's when Phoenix offered to explain exactly why Earth had been reclassified as uninhabitable by every galactic civilization that had ever encountered it. Admiral Vel-Kairth's crystalline features shifted through several different expressions of confusion before settling on what appeared to be carefully controlled alarm. "Commander, please clarify your previous statement about planetary reclassification." Phoenix stepped closer to the communication array, and Zeth-Kairon noticed that the Admiral's bioscanners were immediately focusing on her with the kind of intensity usually reserved for analyzing unknown weapons. "Hi there," Phoenix said with the casual friendliness that had been unsettling Valdris warriors for the past several hours. "I'm Phoenix. I think there might be some miscommunication about Earth's environmental conditions." "Miscommunication," Admiral Vel-Kairth repeated slowly. "Local primitive, Earth is classified as Category 3, basic atmospheric composition, standard gravity, primitive ecosystem. Your species represents minimal technological development and simple biological adaptation." "Right, well, about that," Phoenix scratched her head in a gesture that somehow managed to convey both amusement and sympathy. "Your database might be a little out of date. When was the last time anyone actually surveyed our planet?" "Galactic records indicate comprehensive survey data from," the Admiral paused, consulting his archives, "approximately 3,847 galactic standard years ago, or so about 4,000 years. That explains a lot." Phoenix turned to look at Zeth-Kairon and Lieutenant Kexamorian, who were both monitoring their environmental suits' declining power reserves. "You guys are operating on really old intel." "Intel?" Lieutenant Kexamorian's translator struggled with the concept. "Intelligence, information, data." Phoenix gestured around the shelter. "Look, when your people first surveyed Earth, humans were probably just figuring out agriculture. We've had some time to develop since then. Admiral Velkerth's image flickered with what might have been technological interference, or possibly just disbelief. Develop? The survey data indicates pre-industrial civilization with no technological capability beyond primitive tool use. Yeah, that's changed a bit. Phoenix walked over to what appeared to be a simple control panel and activated several systems that immediately began displaying atmospheric readings, communication arrays, and what looked suspiciously like advanced sensor networks. We've got 8 billion people now, global communication systems, space travel, genetic engineering, fusion power, terraforming capability. Impossible, Admiral Velkerth stated flatly. Galactic development protocols indicate that species progression from primitive tool use to interstellar capability requires approximately 15,000 to 20,000 galactic standard years under optimal conditions. Well, we did it in about 4,000. But here's the thing. We didn't have optimal conditions. Phoenix's tone carried a note that made both Valdris warriors unconsciously step backward. We had Earth conditions. Zeth-Kairon felt something cold settle in his genetically perfect stomach. What exactly are Earth conditions? Constant environmental pressure, climate variations that could kill you if you're not prepared, natural disasters that force rapid adaptation or elimination, predators, diseases, resource scarcity, extreme weather, geological instability. Phoenix counted off factors that sounded like a catalog of planetary hazards. Basically, everything that could make life difficult. That should have prevented development, not accelerated it, Lieutenant Morian protested. Should have, maybe. But it didn't. Instead, it forced us to get creative, get tough, and get smart really quickly. Phoenix activated another display that showed global population distribution. See, when your environment is constantly trying to kill you, you have two choices. Adapt or die, and you chose adaptation. Admiral Velkerth's voice carried a note of something approaching respect. We chose survival, which turned out to be the same thing. Phoenix pulled up what appeared to be historical climate data. Ice ages, volcanic winters, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, magnetic pole reversals, solar radiation fluctuations. We've been through pretty much everything a planet can throw at a species. And survived, Zeth-Kairon said quietly, and thrived. Because here's what I think your surveys missed. Earth isn't a Category 3 primitive world. Earth is a Category 12 death world that happens to be inhabited by a species that evolved specifically to handle Category 12 death world conditions. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Valdris environmental suits working overtime to keep their occupants alive in what Phoenix considered a comfortable indoor environment. Category 12, Admiral Velkerth finally managed. Category 12 worlds are classified as uninhabitable. The galactic standard for Category 12 includes ambient radiation, extreme weather, geological instability, atmospheric toxicity. Yep, that's Earth. Phoenix's casual confirmation carried the weight of a paradigm-shattering revelation. But when you evolve on a Category 12 death world, Category 12 conditions become normal. What you call uninhabitable, we call Tuesday. Lieutenant Morian was frantically checking her bio readings. Sir, if this is accurate, it means humans represent successful evolutionary adaptation to environmental conditions that our species cannot survive without technological intervention. It means, Zeth-Kairon said slowly, that we've been measuring evolutionary success by the wrong standards entirely. Phoenix nodded. See, I think your species achieved something really impressive. You conquered your environment, controlled it, made it perfect for your biology. That's amazing engineering. But evolution doesn't work that way. Evolution responds to pressure, challenge, constant adaptation requirements. You're saying that environmental control prevented optimal evolutionary development. Admiral Velkerth's voice carried the tone of someone watching their entire worldview collapse. I'm saying that environmental control and evolutionary development might be mutually exclusive. You can have perfect conditions or you can have perfect adaptation, but probably not both. The communication array suddenly lit up with priority alerts as additional Valdris vessels approached Earth's orbital space. Admiral Vilkith's expression shifted to one of active concern. Commander, we have a problem. The rescue fleet is reporting severe difficulties with atmospheric entry. Their environmental systems are registering hostile conditions that exceed safety parameters. What kind of difficulties? Zeth-Kairon asked. Though he was beginning to suspect, he already knew. Solar radiation interference, electromagnetic fluctuations, atmospheric density variations, chemical composition anomalies. The Admiral's list sounded suspiciously familiar. 3 ships have already aborted approach due to system failures. Phoenix looked sympathetic. Yeah, our atmosphere can be pretty rough on sensitive equipment. High oxygen content makes things corrosive, electromagnetic field variations mess with electronics, solar radiation gets through the ozone layer, atmospheric moisture causes all kinds of problems for metal components. The rescue fleet cannot reach surface conditions safely, Admiral Velkareth concluded with obvious frustration. Well, Phoenix said thoughtfully, there is an alternative. Both Valdris warriors looked at her with expressions that combined hope and terror. The volcanic thermal zone we passed earlier. It connects to a series of caves that lead up to higher elevation. Much easier for atmospheric entry at altitude. Less interference, more stable conditions. Phoenix paused, seeming to consider something. Of course, the path goes right through the active thermal field, and there are some geologically active areas, but it's definitely the most direct route. Geologically active areas, Lieutenant Kexmorian repeated weakly. Lava tubes mostly. Some sulfur vents, hot springs, the occasional minor eruption. Nothing too serious. Phoenix spoke as if describing a pleasant hiking trail rather than a journey through geological hell. I make the trip pretty regularly to maintain the communication relay at the summit. You regularly traverse active volcanic terrain, Zeth-Kairon said, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone who had given up on being surprised. It's really not that bad once you know the route. The trick is reading the thermal patterns and avoiding the unstable areas. Phoenix checked her chronometer. We should probably get moving, though. The afternoon thermal cycles can get pretty intense, and you guys don't look like you're handling the current conditions very well. Both Valdris warriors looked at their environmental suit readings, which were showing power levels that would not sustain them through a major expedition into hostile terrain. Phoenix, Zeth-Kairon said carefully. When you say the afternoon thermal cycles get intense, surface temperatures climb to about 160, sometimes 170 degrees in direct sunlight. Plus the thermal vents push localized readings, quite a bit higher. And there's usually some atmospheric disturbance from the temperature differentials. She spoke as matter-of-factly as if discussing weather, rather than conditions that would sterilize most galactic life forms. Admiral Velkareth's voice cut through their growing panic. Commander, the rescue fleet is requesting alternative extraction coordinates. They cannot maintain orbital position much longer due to radiation interference from the local star. Local star? Phoenix looked confused. You mean the sun? It's pretty active lately. Solar flare season and all that. Makes communication tricky, but it's nothing unusual. Solar flare season, Lieutenant Kexmorian managed to say. Yeah, happens every few years. Increased solar radiation, electromagnetic interference, aurora activity, satellite disruption. Most of our tech is hardened against it, but older systems sometimes have problems. Zeth-Kairon realized that they were facing a choice between abandoning their rescue entirely or following a human through conditions that their biology and technology were fundamentally unprepared for. Admiral, he said slowly, I believe we're going to need to accept local guidance for extraction. Local guidance. Commander, you're talking about relying on primitive beings for technological assistance. Phoenix smiled, and there was something in that expression that suggested she understood exactly what was happening to Valdris' concepts of superiority. Don't worry, she said. I'll try to keep you safe. And somehow, that reassurance from a primitive human felt like the most genuine offer of help any of them had received in their entire genetically perfect lives. Commander, Admiral Velkareth's voice carried a note of desperate professionalism. The rescue fleet is reporting cascade failures in atmospheric shielding. They need extraction coordinates within the next 2 hours, or they'll be forced to retreat to safe orbital distance. Lieutenant Kexmorian checked her environmental suit's power reserves with growing alarm. Sir, at current consumption rates, my life support will fail in approximately 4.3 hours. The trek through volcanic terrain will likely accelerate power drain significantly. Phoenix overheard this exchange with apparent concern. Your suits are really working that hard just to keep you alive in here? This is climate-controlled environment. Climate-controlled? Zeth-Kairon looked around the shelter that his scanners had been classifying as an environmental hazard zone. The atmospheric composition contains irregularities that require constant filtration. The humidity levels exceed safe parameters. The ambient radiation— Right, I forgot you guys can't handle background radiation. Phoenix walked over to what appeared to be a simple monitoring device. Current readings show about 0.2 microsieverts per hour. That's actually pretty low for this area. Sometimes we get up to 0.5 when the solar activity picks up. 0.5 microsieverts? Lieutenant Kexmorian's voice climbed an octave. That approaches the threshold for mandatory evacuation protocols on most civilized worlds. That's actually kind of concerning. Phoenix looked genuinely troubled by this information. I mean, if 0.5 is dangerous for you guys, I'm not sure how you're going to handle the volcanic route. The thermal vents tend to concentrate some of the background radiation, plus there's radon emission from the rock formations, and some of the mineral deposits are naturally radioactive. Naturally radioactive mineral deposits, Zeth-Kairon repeated, feeling his species' evolutionary confidence crumble further. Nothing too scary, mostly just thorium and uranium trace elements in the granite. Sometimes a little radium near the hot springs. Phoenix spoke as if discussing mildly interesting geological trivia, rather than materials that would require hazmat protocols on any Valdris world. The good news is that the radiation exposure is temporary. We'll only be in the high-activity zones for maybe an hour. An hour of exposure to concentrated radiation while traversing thermally active terrain. Admiral Valkarith's voice carried the flat tone of someone calculating survival probabilities. Commander, this mission profile exceeds all established safety parameters. Sir, Zeth-Kairon replied, looking at Phoenix, who was casually discussing conditions that terrified trained Valdrin military personnel. I believe we may need to revise our understanding of what constitutes established safety parameters. Phoenix checked her equipment with the practiced efficiency of someone who did this regularly. Look, I know it sounds intimidating, but humans have been living in this environment for thousands of years. We've got pretty good instincts for managing the risks. Plus, I've got some extra gear that might help. She opened what appeared to be a storage container and began pulling out equipment that looked suspiciously advanced for a supposedly primitive civilization. Radiation monitoring badges, thermal protection gear, emergency oxygen supplies, communication devices. Phoenix laid out equipment that rivaled Valdris's military specifications. Most of it's designed for human physiology, but it might provide some additional protection. Lieutenant Kexmorian examined the gear with her scanner and immediately recoiled. This equipment, the technological sophistication, is comparable to our own military-grade systems. Military-grade? Phoenix looked puzzled. This is just standard hiking gear. You can pick most of it up at any outdoor equipment store, though I guess the radiation monitors might be a little specialized. Standard hiking gear, Zeth-Kairon mused. On your world, recreational activities require equipment that matches our military specifications. Well, yeah, if you're going to be hiking in areas with elevated radiation, unstable geology, extreme temperatures, and potential atmospheric hazards, you want gear that can handle the conditions. Phoenix shouldered a pack that appeared to contain enough survival equipment to support a small military unit. Safety first, right? Admiral Valkarith's image flickered with what might have been technological interference or existential crisis. Commander, are you telling me that humans engage in recreational activities that require military-grade safety equipment? Apparently so, sir. Zeth-Kairon watched Phoenix distribute protective gear with the casual competence of someone who did this every weekend. And they consider it hiking? Hiking, the Admiral repeated weakly. What they call recreational exercise, we would classify as extreme survival training. Phoenix paused in her equipment distribution. You know, now I'm starting to understand why your people have been having trouble with our planet. If this stuff seems military-grade to you, then our whole environment must look pretty hostile. Pretty hostile, Lieutenant Kexmorian echoed. Phoenix, Your planet registers as uninhabitable on our environmental assessment scales, but you live here anyway, Phoenix said. And there was something like respect in her voice. That's actually pretty impressive. And that's when Zeth-Kairon realized that the human was genuinely impressed by their survival in conditions she considered normal, while he was terrified of conditions she considered recreational. The journey to the volcanic extraction point began with Phoenix stepping casually onto ground that made both Valdris warriors' environmental suits immediately activate emergency cooling protocols. "Stay close," she called over her shoulder, moving with practiced ease across terrain that registered as an active hazard zone on every scanner the aliens possessed. "The path gets a little tricky up ahead, but it's pretty straightforward once you know where to step." Zeth-Kairon followed at what he hoped was a safe distance, his genetically perfect physiology straining against environmental conditions that Phoenix navigated like a casual stroll. Behind him, Lieutenant Kex Morian's bio-readings were spiking into ranges that should have triggered immediate medical intervention. "Commander," she gasped through her suit's communication system, "my thermal regulation systems are operating at 97% capacity, and we've barely begun the ascent." "Acknowledged," Zeth-Kairon replied, watching Phoenix hop lightly across a fissure in the ground that was venting superheated gas directly from the planet's core. "Maintain position and monitor power reserves." Phoenix paused at the edge of what appeared to be a lava field, actual molten rock flowing in streams across the landscape like deadly rivers of fire. She consulted what looked like a handheld device before turning back to them with a reassuring smile. "Good news," she announced. "The lava flows are running cooler today, only about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. That means the rock surfaces should be safe to walk on after they've been cooling for just a few minutes." "Safe to walk on," Zeth-Kairon repeated, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone whose reality had broken entirely. "Well, safe from me anyway. You guys might want to stick to the older flows, where the surface temperature has dropped to maybe 200 degrees. Phoenix pointed to areas of rock that glowed with residual heat. "Those should be manageable with your environmental suits." She stepped onto the cooling lava flow without hesitation, her simple hiking boots apparently providing adequate protection from surface temperatures that would have vaporized most galactic materials instantly. Steam rose from her footsteps, but she moved with the confident stride of someone who had done this countless times before. "This is impossible," Lieutenant Kex Morian breathed, watching Phoenix walk across molten rock like it was a sidewalk. "No biological entity can survive direct contact with those temperatures." "She's not just surviving," Zeth-Kairon observed with growing awe and terror. "She's comfortable." Phoenix reached the far side of the lava field and turned back to them, apparently unbothered by the fact that she had just traversed conditions that would constitute a planetary emergency on any civilized world. "Your turn," she called cheerfully. "Just follow my footsteps and you should be fine. Try not to put too much weight on any one spot. Some of the crust is still pretty thin." Both Valdris warriors stared at the path Phoenix had taken, which led directly across actively cooling molten rock through an environment that their scanners were classifying as unsurvivable. "Sir," Lieutenant Kex Morian's voice was tight with barely controlled panic, "my environmental suit is projecting total system failure if I attempt to cross that terrain." Zeth-Kairon checked his own readings and found similar projections. Their advanced life support systems, designed to handle the most extreme conditions the galaxy could offer, were inadequate for what Phoenix considered routine travel. "Phoenix," he called across the lava field, "our technology cannot safely traverse those conditions." "Really?" She looked genuinely concerned. "Hang on. Let me see what I can do." Phoenix disappeared behind an outcropping of volcanic rock, and both aliens could hear sounds that suggested she was moving heavy equipment. When she reappeared, she was dragging what appeared to be a primitive wheeled cart. "Emergency rescue sled," she explained, positioning the device at the edge of the lava field. "It's insulated and has its own cooling system. Should provide enough protection to get your suits across without total failure." Zeth-Kairon examined the rescue sled with his scanner and immediately recoiled at the readings. "Phoenix, this device appears to be constructed from basic materials. How can it provide protection that our advanced technology cannot?" "It's designed for these conditions," she replied simply. "Your suits are amazing, really impressive engineering, but they're designed for controlled environments. This sled is built specifically For volcanic rescue operations on Earth. Volcanic rescue operations, Lieutenant Kexmorian repeated weakly. You have standardized procedures for rescuing people from active volcanic zones? Of course. People get into trouble in geologically active areas pretty regularly. Hikers, researchers, thrill seekers, mining operations. Phoenix began loading their equipment onto the sled with practiced efficiency. Standard emergency services include volcanic, seismic, extreme weather, radiation exposure, and toxic atmosphere rescue protocols. Both Valdris warriors climbed onto the rescue sled, with the desperate gratitude of beings whose technological superiority had proved utterly inadequate for actual survival. As Phoenix began pulling them across the lava field, Zeth-Kairon found himself in the unprecedented position of having his life depend entirely on the capabilities of someone his species classified as primitive. Phoenix, he said as they moved across terrain that would have been instantly lethal without her intervention. How many humans possess your survival capabilities? My capabilities? She sounded puzzled by the question. I'm not really anything special. Basic wilderness training, standard emergency response certification, maybe a little more experience with volcanic terrain than most people, but nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing out of the ordinary, Lieutenant Kexmorian echoed faintly. I mean, there are people way more capable than me. Mountain rescue specialists, deep-sea operators, Arctic researchers, desert survival experts, astronauts, military personnel. Phoenix lifted off categories of humans who apparently exceeded her already impossible capabilities. If you really want to see impressive human environmental adaptation, you should meet some of the folks who work in the really challenging conditions. Really challenging conditions, Zeth-Kairon managed to say. Yeah, like deep ocean thermal vents, polar expeditions, high-altitude climbing, desert exploration, radiation cleanup operations. Phoenix counted off environments that sounded like a catalog of ways the universe could kill someone. Those jobs require serious specialized training. They reached the far side of the lava field, and Phoenix helped them off the rescue sled with the casual competence of someone who rescued technologically superior aliens from volcanic death traps on a regular basis. We're almost there, she announced, pointing toward what appeared to be a trail leading up the side of an actively smoking volcano. Just another mile or so to the extraction point. Admiral Velkaert's voice crackled through their communication system with obvious relief. Commander Zeth-Kairon, the rescue fleet has successfully reached orbital extraction position. What is your current status? Admiral, Zeth-Kairon replied, looking up at Phoenix, who was checking her equipment with the same casual professionalism she'd displayed throughout their journey. We are approaching extraction coordinates under local guidance. Local guidance. Commander, you were instructed to avoid contact with primitive populations. Sir, I believe our classification of the local population requires immediate revision. There was a pause from Admiral Velkaert that suggested he was processing information that didn't fit his existing frameworks. Revision how, Commander? Zeth-Kairon looked at Phoenix, who had just successfully guided two genetically perfect beings through environmental conditions that challenged their most advanced technology, using equipment she described as standard hiking gear, and capabilities she considered nothing out of the ordinary. Sir, I believe we need to completely reconsider our understanding of what constitutes evolutionary advancement. Admiral Velkaert's voice carried a note of confusion. Commander, please clarify. You're on a primitive world with simple life forms. Negative, sir. We're on a death world, inhabited by a species that has evolved successful adaptation to conditions that exceed our technological capabilities. The silence that followed was so complete that both Valdris warriors checked their communication systems to ensure they were still connected. Commander, Admiral Velkaert finally said, are you reporting that the local primitives possess superior environmental capabilities to Valdris technology? Sir, I'm reporting that what we classified as primitives have just demonstrated biological and technological capabilities that saved our lives in conditions our systems couldn't handle. Phoenix, who had been politely listening to this exchange, raised her hand. Actually, if it helps, I'd be happy to talk to your admiral about Earth's environmental conditions. We've got pretty comprehensive data on planetary systems, climate patterns, geological activity, radiation exposure, atmospheric composition. You have comprehensive planetary data. Admiral Velkaert's voice climbed an octave. Sure. We've been monitoring and analyzing our environment for centuries. It's kind of necessary when you live on a planet that's constantly trying to kill you. Phoenix activated her handheld device, which immediately began displaying environmental data that rivaled Valdris military reconnaissance capabilities. Current atmospheric composition, seismic activity, solar radiation levels, weather pattern predictions, geological stability assessments. Lieutenant Kexmorian was staring at the device with her scanner. Sir, the technological sophistication of that single handheld unit approaches our shipboard environmental analysis systems, and every human carries one, Admiral Velkarath asked weakly. Most people have something similar in their communication devices, Phoenix replied. Basic environmental monitoring is pretty standard. You kind of need it when the weather can kill you if you're not prepared. Admiral Velkaith was quiet for several long moments. When he spoke again, his voice carried the careful tone of someone whose entire worldview was undergoing catastrophic revision. Commander, I'm ordering immediate priority reclassification of this system. Earth is being upgraded from Category 3 Primitive World to whatever category covers death worlds inhabited by technologically sophisticated species that have achieved successful environmental adaptation. What category is that, sir? Zeth-Kairon asked. I don't know, Commander. We're going to have to create a new one. Phoenix smiled at this exchange with the expression of someone who had just watched a fundamental shift in galactic understanding occur in real time. You know, she said conversationally, I think you guys are going to fit in just fine once you adjust to local conditions. Most visitors do, eventually. And as they reached the extraction point, where the rescue fleet waited in what they now understood was the safest possible orbital position around a death world, Zeth-Kairon realized that the Valdris Empire's concept of evolutionary superiority had just been replaced by the humbling recognition that survival wasn't about achieving perfection. It was about adapting to conditions that perfection couldn't handle. And humans, apparently, were very good at adaptation.